The sun was dipping behind the jagged mountains, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold, but the beauty did little to calm the turmoil inside her. She sat on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, knees drawn up to her chest, staring blankly at the forest floor. The memory of her past lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake, a childhood where warmth was scarce, affection conditional, and trust a concept that had always betrayed her. "I don't know how to be loved," she whispered to herself, almost as if speaking it aloud could make it true. From the dense line of trees, a soft rustle announced his presence before she even saw him. The Apache moved with quiet certainty, a figure shaped by the land itself, strong, silent, and observant. His eyes, dark and steady, held a patience she had never encountered before. He knelt a few feet away, not invading her space but close, enough to offer silent company. For a moment, neither spoke. She felt both relief and discomfort. Relief that she was not entirely alone. Discomfort because the idea of connection had always felt dangerous. "You don't need to understand it," he said finally, his voice low, calm, almost like a melody that didn't demand attention but invited it. "Love needs no lesson, only trust." The words struck her, not with the force of revelation, but with the quiet weight of truth. She had spent so long believing that love was earned through perfection or hidden beneath tests and trials. She had built walls so high that even the thought of someone scaling them seemed impossible. And yet, there was something in his presence, a promise unspoken, a patience unwavering, that challenged everything she had believed about herself. He didn't press her to respond, didn't lean in or touch her. Instead, he offered the simplest of gestures. A warm smile, a steady gaze, a presence that said, "I am here, and I will not leave." It was terrifying and exhilarating at once. She wanted to retreat, to tell herself she didn't deserve this, that love was a lie for people like her. But the thought of leaving that safety, however strange it felt, made her chest ache with loneliness she had ignored for too long. "Why are you here?" she asked after a long pause, her voice small, almost brittle. "To walk with you," he replied. "Not to change you, not to fix you, just to be." The simplicity of it disarmed her. No agenda, no expectation, no conditions, just presence. She had never encountered love so unassuming, so patient, that it demanded nothing from her yet offered everything. For the first time, the notion of trust seemed like a bridge she could dare to cross, rather than a trap waiting to collapse beneath her feet. Evening shadows deepened around them, the sounds of the forest settling into a gentle rhythm. She watched him, noticing the subtle ways he moved, the careful steps over roots, the way he paused to listen to the wind or the rustle of leaves. It was a kind of harmony, a reminder that life continued around her, that she was not separate from it. And for the first time she felt the faint stirrings of hope. Not the naive hope of fairy tales, but the cautious, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to be loved without knowing all the rules. She could simply trust, and in that trust, find a connection that required no explanations, no conditions, only the willingness to let someone stand beside her, steady and unafraid. The Apache's presence was quiet, unassuming, yet it carried a power that words could never fully convey. And in that stillness, in the golden twilight, she felt the first fragile threads of something new weaving through her heart. The morning sun spilled across the clearing, turning dew into tiny crystals that sparkled like scattered jewels. She stirred from a restless sleep, the memories of yesterday's conversation lingering in her mind. The Apache was already awake, tending to the small fire they had built. He moved with ease and purpose, every action deliberate yet unhurried, as if the world itself was waiting for him to take the lead. She watched silently, unsure if she should interrupt or simply observe. "Breakfast," he said, offering her a piece of bread wrapped in a cloth. His tone was gentle, without command or expectation. She hesitated, staring at the simple offering. She had spent her life being told what she could and couldn't have, what she deserved and didn't, and the idea of being offered something without strings attached was alien. Slowly she took it, feeling the warmth of the bread in her hands and faintly the warmth of his care. As they ate, he spoke of small, ordinary things, the path the river took through the forest, the way the wind carried scents of pine and sage, the habits of animals they might encounter. His words were never forced, never meant to impress, only to share. She realized that in his presence, conversation didn't have to be a test. She could listen, respond, or simply exist beside him without judgment. For someone who had always feared scrutiny, this was revolutionary. Later, he led her toward a narrow trail winding into the woods. She followed reluctantly at first, her body tense with the reflexive caution that had protected her for so long. He noticed but said nothing, allowing her to walk at her own pace. They paused at a small clearing where sunlight dappled the ground, and he knelt beside a cluster of wildflowers. "See these?" he asked, his fingers gently brushing the petals. "They grow where they can, without fear, without waiting for permission. Trust the ground, trust the sun, trust the rain. That is all they need to thrive." She looked at him, the metaphor clear yet profound. Love, like the wildflowers, didn't require mastery or control. It required trust. Slowly, carefully, she let the idea sink in, allowing herself to imagine a life where she didn't have to protect every corner of her heart. Days passed, and the routine of survival in the wilderness created a rhythm between them. He taught her to track animals, to read the signs of the forest, to move silently across the earth. Each lesson was practical, yet beneath every gesture was an unspoken message. She could depend on him. She could let down her guard, even if only a fraction at a time. One evening, as the sky turned violet and fireflies began their dance, she spoke quietly, almost afraid of the words. I think I want to try," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Try to trust, I mean. Try to be loved." The Apache's smile was soft, not triumphant, not possessive, just steady and reassuring. "That is all anyone can ask," he replied. "Love is not a lesson. It is a choice, and it begins with trust. You are already learning." For the first time in her life, she felt the dangerous but exhilarating sensation of hope rooted in something tangible. She realized that trust wasn't an immediate surrender, but a slow, deliberate opening of her heart. Each shared meal, each quiet walk, each protective glance built a bridge between fear and acceptance. And as night settled around them, with the stars shimmering like distant promises, she felt herself leaning into that bridge, daring to step forward, even if only a little. The Apache remained beside her, patient, unwavering, a living reminder that love, at its core, demanded nothing but the courage to trust. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, but a tension lingered beneath the beauty. She had begun to trust him, to allow herself the small comforts of his presence. Yet old fears and doubts still whispered like shadows at the edge of her mind. The Apache noticed her unease, though he never asked directly. His patience had become a quiet anchor, grounding her even when uncertainty gnawed at her. They traveled deeper into the forest that day, following a trail along the river. The water gurgled over smooth stones, a constant, soothing rhythm. Yet, the wilderness held its own dangers. A sudden rustling in the underbrush startled her, and she froze, heart hammering. Before she could react, the Apache was moving, swift, precise, and protective. A wild boar, large and aggressive, charged from the bushes. He stepped in front of her, spear in hand, and drove it back with skill born of years in the wild. Her pulse slowed only gradually, but the fear remained, mingled now with awe. He had not only shielded her, but done so without hesitation or anger. His eyes met hers, calm and steady. "Do you see?" he asked softly. I am here. You can trust that I will not let harm come to you, even when the world is unpredictable." She nodded, words failing her, realizing that trust was more than an abstract idea. It was tangible. It was the way he moved, the consistency of his actions, the quiet reliability that never demanded repayment or explanation. For the first time, she felt a sense of safety that was not dependent on her own vigilance, a feeling so unfamiliar it almost frightened her. That night, they camped near a small spring. He built the fire, prepared their simple meal, and offered her a place on the softest patch of earth. She hesitated, then sat beside him, noticing how natural it felt to lean into the warmth he provided. The forest was alive with nocturnal sounds, but his presence created a sanctuary, a bubble of calm amidst the wild. I never believed anyone could care for me like this," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I always thought love required perfection or repayment, or some hidden rule I could never meet." He looked at her, his expression gentle, patient. "Love asks for none of those things. It asks only for trust, and trust is learned slowly, one step at a time. You have already begun to learn." The words sank in, and she realized she had been measuring love by standards that had nothing to do with it. Every shared moment, the fire, the walks, the quiet exchanges, had been lessons in patience, consistency, and care. She began to understand that the fear she carried was not a measure of her worth, but of how rarely she had felt safe to open her heart. Days turned into a rhythm of small, significant milestones. She allowed herself to laugh when he showed her how to mimic animal tracks. She let him guide her across treacherous terrain without questioning every step. She began to speak freely about her past, her fears, and even her dreams, and he listened without judgment. Each act of trust became a stone in the foundation of something new, something fragile but real. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the forest in shades of gold and amber, she realized she no longer flinched at his touch or the thought of relying on him. She was learning that love did not have to be complicated, nor did it require a manual or endless caution. It required openness, vulnerability, and above all, trust. He met her gaze, and in that look she saw a reflection of her own tentative courage. The bridge between fear and acceptance had grown stronger, yet it still demanded care. And as the first stars blinked awake above them, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she could face them, because she no longer faced them alone. The forest had grown denser, shadows stretching long as the sun sank behind the mountains. She and the Apache moved carefully along a narrow trail, their steps quiet against the soft earth. Trust had become a part of her now, a fragile but steady current running beneath her nerves, yet she could feel the old fear whispering at the edges. The wilderness, beautiful as it was, still held dangers she could neither predict nor control. They reached a clearing where the river widened, its waters swift and cold. He motioned for her to stay behind a stand of trees while he inspected the bank ahead. She hesitated, heart pounding, not because she feared for her life, but because she was learning the new and unfamiliar: dependence. He had never demanded. She followed blindly, yet now, letting him lead required a surrender she had never known she could give. A sudden shout shattered the quiet. From the opposite bank, men appeared, rough-looking, armed, and intent. Panic surged through her chest, but the Apache's calm was immediate. He moved between her and the threat, a protective wall of motion and presence. "Stay here," he instructed quietly, his voice firm yet steady. She nodded, though a part of her wanted to flee. The men tried to cross the shallow river, but he intercepted them with calculated precision. She watched, breath held, as he disarmed them without unnecessary violence, using skill and strategy, rather than brute force. The scene unfolded like a test, not only of his strength, but of her ability to trust fully, to believe in the safety he had promised, even when fear clawed at her heart. When the danger passed, the men retreating with a mixture of fear and confusion, she ran to him, relief flooding her. She found him waiting, calm and unshaken, as if the incident had been a lesson disguised as threat. Her knees weakened, and she realized for the first time how deeply she had come to rely on him, not only for protection, but for the quiet certainty that someone cared enough to remain steadfast. "You were afraid," he said softly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "And yet, you stayed. You trusted me." She could only nod, tears stinging her eyes. She had never understood what trust truly meant until that moment. Not the abstract idea, but the lived experience of leaning on someone when the world seemed intent on shaking you apart. She had chosen to rely on him, and he had not faltered. That night, as they sat by the fire, she spoke openly, the words tumbling out in a rush she could no longer contain. "I never thought I could feel safe. I never thought I could let someone in. I've always built walls so high, but with you I feel something I can't name. Maybe it's trust. Maybe it's hope. Maybe it's love." He reached for her hand, fingers warm and steady. "It is all of those things. Love grows from trust, not from perfection. It is not earned or bargained for. It is chosen every day, in small acts of courage and care." For the first time, she felt her walls truly begin to crumble, not in fear, not in weakness, but in the strength of someone who had shown her that she could be vulnerable and remain whole. Each shared glance, each gesture of patience, each unspoken promise had built a bridge over the chasm she had carried inside her for years. Sleep came that night wrapped in the comfort of shared warmth, the fire casting dancing shadows on their faces. She felt her heartbeat in sync with his, a rhythm that was steady, sure, and reassuring. And as the forest hummed around them, she realized that love did not need a manual, nor lessons, nor perfection. It required only trust, and she had finally learned to give it freely. The days that followed were filled with quiet routines and small joys, gathering firewood, fishing along the riverbank, and learning the intricate ways of the forest. Yet beneath the peace, a subtle tension began to stir within her. Trust, she realized, was fragile. It could grow and flourish, but it could also be tested, stretched thin by doubt, or the return of old fears. She felt it stirring now, a whispering uncertainty that perhaps this safety, this love, was temporary, too good to last. The Apache noticed her quiet distance, though he never pressured her to explain. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and painted the sky with amber and violet streaks, he approached her with the calm assurance she had come to rely on. "You are thinking too much," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Fear and doubt are shadows. They are not truths. Trust is what shapes reality, not hesitation." She wanted to argue, to retreat into her familiar walls, but the weight of his patience was a gentle force she could not resist. "What if I fail?" she whispered. "What if I am not worthy of this, of you?" He took her hands in his, strong, yet gentle, anchoring her in the present. "Love is not about worthiness," he said. "It is not measured by past failures or fears. It exists in the choice to be present, the courage to trust. You are here, with me, because you have already made that choice." The sincerity in his voice, the steady warmth of his hands, the quiet strength of his gaze, all of it began to dissolve the remnants of her doubt. She realized that love, true love, was not about proving herself or earning affection. It was about allowing herself to be vulnerable, to let someone stand beside her even when the world had taught her otherwise. Days later, an unexpected challenge tested the fragile bridge they had built. A sudden storm swept through the forest, fierce winds and heavy rain turning the trails into mud, and the river into a roaring torrent. She clung to a tree for balance, shivering, soaked, and terrified. The Apache appeared at her side, shouting, over the wind, guiding her toward shelter with calm authority. Every step was a struggle, every gust of wind a reminder of how exposed and fragile they were. Yet she trusted him completely, following without hesitation, letting go of the fear that had dominated her life for so long. She felt the thrill of surrender, not as weakness, but as courage, the courage to rely on someone fully, without reservation. Finally, they reached a protected cave along the cliffside. They huddled close for warmth, listening to the storm rage outside. She realized that her trust was no longer tentative. It had become a choice she embraced consciously, even in the face of fear. She no longer doubted that love could exist without conditions, without judgment, and without fear of abandonment. "I never thought I could feel this safe," she admitted, voice trembling with emotion. "With you, I feel like I can face anything." He brushed a strand of wet hair from her face and smiled gently. "Because you can, and because we face it together. Trust is not fragile, it is resilient. You have learned that now. And love. Love grows from that resilience." For the first time in her life, she felt truly at peace. The storm outside mirrored the storms she had weathered within herself. But now she had discovered the anchor she had long sought. Trust had become her guide, and love, once a distant concept, had become tangible, living, and real. She realized that the journey was far from over, but with him by her side, she had the courage to continue, to embrace the unknown, and to allow herself fully to be loved. And as the night deepened and the storm subsided, she rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the quiet power of trust and the steady pulse of love she had finally dared to accept. The forest had begun to regain its calm after the storm, though the memory of the raging winds and torrential rain lingered in her mind like a shadow. She and the Apache had emerged from the cave, soaked but unharmed, and the shared ordeal had strengthened the fragile bond that had been growing between them. Yet with survival came the realization that the wilderness was not the only challenge. They would face trials that tested not only their bodies, but the trust and love that now tethered them together. The next morning, she awoke to find him already, gathering supplies near the riverbank. The rhythm of his movements, so deliberate and unhurried, reminded her of the steady heartbeat of trust that had become the foundation of their connection. She watched him for a moment, feeling an unfamiliar sense of safety and calm. It struck her how far she had come, from a woman afraid to be touched, to one who could sit quietly beside another and feel the warmth of presence as a gift rather than a threat. As they prepared to move deeper into the forest, a distant shout cut through the morning air. She froze, instinctively scanning the trees, but he remained calm, his hand on hers, grounding her. "Do not fear," he said softly, his voice carrying the same quiet authority she had come to rely on. "We will face it together." From the ridge above, a group of strangers appeared, clearly tracking them. Their intent was unclear, but the tension in the air was undeniable. She felt the familiar spike of fear, but this time it was different. The fear did not dominate her. Instead, she felt the strength of trust in every step, in every glance exchanged with him. She no longer had to face the unknown alone. The Apache led her through a hidden trail, his knowledge of the forest allowing them to remain unseen. Yet the situation demanded more than skill. It demanded confidence in each other, the kind of trust that had been nurtured over days of shared survival and quiet companionship. She followed without hesitation, relying on him completely, allowing her fears to exist without dictating her actions. As night fell, they found a small, sheltered hollow, perfect for a temporary refuge. They built a fire, the flames flickering across their faces, and she felt a strange mix of adrenaline and relief. The danger was still near, yet she felt safer than ever. not because of her own defenses, but because of the unspoken promise in his presence. He was steadfast, patient, and protective, and she trusted him implicitly. "I never imagined I could feel this way," she said, her voice soft as the fire crackled. "After everything, after all the fear, I feel like I finally understand what it means to be loved." He looked at her, eyes steady, calm, unwavering. "Love is not something to understand fully," he replied. "It is something to live, to choose, to trust in. You have already begun that choice, and that is enough." The firelight danced across the hollow, illuminating the small but significant victories of their journey. Her laughter that had returned. In fleeting moments, the quiet moments of shared silence, and the courage to rely on another without fear of rejection. Trust, she realized, was not a fragile thing. It was the strongest foundation of all. And love, when built upon it, could endure any storm, any threat, any lingering shadow from the past. As she leaned against him that night, listening to the distant sounds of the forest, she understood that their journey was far from over. But for the first time, she did not fear what lay ahead. Trust had become the bridge between fear and hope, and love, once a concept she thought she could never grasp, had become a living presence she could feel in every heartbeat. And in that quiet, protected hollow, she allowed herself to surrender, fully, not blindly, but with a deliberate courage born of the days and nights they had spent learning to rely on one another. She had finally learned that love needed no lesson, only trust, and she had found it in him. The forest was quiet, almost reverent, as dawn crept through the canopy. Birds called softly, and the wind whispered through the pines. She stirred from sleep, feeling the lingering warmth of the Apache beside her, a calm she had learned to rely on. Yet this morning, something felt different. A tension she could not immediately name. A subtle weight pressing against the fragile trust she had worked so hard to cultivate. They moved slowly along the river trail, each step deliberate, each glance measured. She felt her pulse quicken, not from fear of the wilderness this time, but from the sense that her heart was about to face a challenge unlike any before. The Apache noticed her hesitation, pausing to look at her with that quiet patience that had become her anchor. "Whatever comes, you must remember, trust is your strength," he said softly, his hand brushing hers in a reassuring gesture. Hours. Later, they reached the edge of a clearing where the remnants of a burned cabin stood. Smoke curled faintly from its ruins, and a chill ran down her spine. She recognized the place, not just the location, but the memories it evoked. This was where she had been abandoned years ago, left to face fear, pain, and betrayal alone. The past had always been a shadow over her, a reminder that love had once betrayed her, and trust had been a dangerous gamble. I can't go in there," she whispered, voice trembling. Her knees shook, and for a moment she felt the old fear trying to reclaim her. "I can't face it." The Apache stepped closer, his presence steadying her. "You don't have to face it alone," he said. "You don't have to face it at all, if you do not wish. But I will be with you, and I will not leave." She took a deep breath, trying to steady the rapid rhythm of her heart. The fear was real, but so was the trust she had built with him. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Slowly she nodded, taking his hand as they approached the cabin together. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and decay, but she forced herself to look beyond the destruction. The memories surged forward, every moment of loneliness, betrayal, and rejection. But he did not flinch, did not judge. He stood beside her, his steady presence a reminder that love, when grounded in trust, could face even the darkest corners of the past. Tears ran down her cheeks as she whispered, I've never faced this before. Never with anyone." He knelt beside her, placing a hand gently over hers. "Now you do. You are not alone. You are safe. You are loved." The words were simple, yet they carried a power she had never known. She felt the walls she had spent years constructing crumble in slow, deliberate waves. Trust was no longer an abstract concept. It was tangible in the warmth of his hand, the calm steadiness of his voice, the unwavering presence that did not demand perfection or repayment. Hours passed as they sat together, the sun tracing patterns across the broken cabin. She spoke of her past for the first time fully, recounting the pain, the betrayals, the moments she had believed herself unworthy of love. And he listened, without interruption, without judgment, simply bearing witness to her story. When she finally fell silent, exhausted but lighter than she had ever felt, he drew her close, enveloping her in an embrace that was both protective and tender. "You see now," he murmured, "trust and love do not erase the past, but they give it meaning. They show you that you are not defined by fear, but by courage, the courage to let someone stand beside you." She rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time, she understood completely that love needed no lessons, no conditions, no tests. It required only trust, and she had given it freely, and without fear. She had received it fully. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and river water. After the emotional confrontation at the burned cabin, she felt lighter, freer, as though a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Yet the forest, with all its beauty, had a way of reminding them that safety was never permanent. Trust had been strengthened, but love, she realized, would soon face a trial unlike any they had encountered. As they followed a winding trail along the river, the distant sound of hooves reached her ears. At first, it was faint, almost dismissible, but as the moments passed, the rhythmic pounding grew louder, more urgent. The Apache paused, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. "We are not alone," he said quietly, his voice steady, but alert. "Someone approaches. Be ready." Her heart skipped a beat, but this time, fear did not dominate her thoughts. She glanced at him and felt the calm reassurance that had become her anchor. She trusted him completely. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. From the ridge above, a small band of strangers emerged, mounted on horseback, their faces masked with suspicion and hostility. They were armed, their intentions unclear but unmistakably threatening. She felt the old instinct to flee rise, but he placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her in the present. "Do not act out of fear. Trust me. Move with me, and we will be safe." They navigated a hidden path through the dense forest, moving silently and efficiently. Every step was a test, not only of skill, but of the trust she had cultivated. She followed without hesitation, her movements mirroring his, relying on his guidance entirely. The adrenaline surged, but it was tempered by the deep knowledge that she was not alone. Suddenly, a stray branch snapped under a horse's hoof. "One of," the men called out, suspicion turning into aggression. The Apache acted quickly, positioning himself between her and the threat. His movements were deliberate and precise, neutralizing the immediate danger without unnecessary violence. She watched, awed by his skill, and felt a surge of gratitude and trust that went beyond words. When the strangers finally withdrew, frustrated by the terrain and the Apache's unmatched knowledge of the forest, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Relief washed over her, but more than that, she realized the depth of their connection. Trust had been tested under pressure, and she had held firm. Love, she understood now, was not a fragile thing. It was resilient, growing stronger through trials and shared courage. That evening, they camped near the river, the gentle flow of water a soothing counterpoint to the day's tension. She looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I never imagined I could feel this safe, or this cared for," she admitted. "Even when danger comes, I know I can rely on you. I can trust you completely." He smiled, a quiet, unassuming expression that carried all the weight of reassurance. "And I will not betray that trust," he said. "Love is not about perfection or the absence of fear. It is about presence, about standing together through the unknown. You have learned to trust, and through that trust, love has grown." She leaned into him, the warmth of his presence wrapping around her like a shield. For the first time, she understood that love was not a lesson to be learned or a puzzle to be solved. It was an experience, a choice, a mutual courage that required patience, consistency, and trust. She had given herself to it fully, and in return, she had received a love that was steady, protective, and unwavering. The stars emerged one by one in the night sky, reflecting in the river like scattered jewels. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. Trust had become their foundation, and love, simple, patient, enduring, had taken root in the most fragile and powerful way. The forest had grown quieter with the approach of evening, the shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. She walked beside the Apache along the riverbank, her thoughts drifting to the days that had passed, the moments of fear, of laughter, of shared silence, and the slow, steady building of trust between them. But tonight, a new tension had begun to stir inside her. They reached a clearing where the river widened, and she paused, sensing a heaviness in the air. He noticed her hesitation and looked at her, his dark eyes steady and calm. "What troubles you?" he asked softly. She hesitated, unsure if she could articulate the turmoil building in her chest. I'm afraid," she admitted finally. "Not of the forest, not of danger, but of losing you. I've never known love like this before, and I don't know if I can hold on to it." He knelt beside her, placing his hand over hers. "Love is not fragile," he said gently. "It is strengthened by trust, and trust is built in shared moments, in choices made together. The fear you feel is natural, but it is not the truth of what we have." She looked at him, searching his face for signs of doubt, and found none. The steadiness in his expression mirrored the steadiness she had come to feel in her own heart, a quiet assurance that she was no longer alone, no longer guarding herself against the world in isolation. That night, as they sat beside the fire, she spoke of her past in ways she had never dared before, of betrayal, of abandonment, of the loneliness that had shaped her life. Each word was heavy with emotion, but he listened without interruption or judgment, offering only the warmth of his presence. In that quiet exchange, she felt the bridge of trust between them grow stronger, each admission a stone laid carefully upon the foundation they had built. But then a subtle doubt crept in, unexpected and sharp. She realized that trusting someone fully was not a single act, but a series of ongoing choices, each one requiring courage. She had chosen to trust him in the face of danger, in the wilderness, but could she trust him with the deepest parts of herself, her vulnerabilities, her fears, her past? He must have sensed the shift, for he reached out and took her hands in his. "You do not need to rush," he said softly. "Trust is not demanded. It is nurtured. You are already giving it, even now, by speaking your heart." Tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded, feeling both the fragility and the strength of her emotions. The fear of loss, the memory of past betrayals, and the uncertainty of the future all swirled within her. Yet beneath it all, she felt a deep, unshakable certainty. He would not leave her, and she could choose to lean on him fully, not in fear, but in love. Hours passed in quiet reflection. the fire burning low as the stars emerged overhead. She rested, her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and allowed herself to imagine a future where trust was not a test, but a constant companion. For the first time, she realized that love was not a fleeting moment, not a fragile sentiment, but a living, growing force, built on patience, presence, and mutual care. And as sleep finally claimed her, she whispered into the night, "I trust you." He held her close, the gentle weight of his arms, a promise unspoken but understood. In that embrace, the lessons of fear, doubt, and vulnerability coalesced into a single truth. Love, when grounded in trust, could endure anything. She had chosen to open herself, and in that choice, she had discovered the strength of her own heart and the enduring power of a love that asked for nothing but faith. The dawn was pale and quiet, the forest bathed in a soft, golden light. After so many days of trials, moments of fear, and small victories, she felt a calm in her chest she had never known before. Trust had become second nature, and love, once a fragile, distant idea, had grown steady and enduring within her. Yet she knew that the true test of their bond was not the absence of danger, but the willingness to face it together, fully, without reservation. They walked along the riverbank side by side, the rhythm of their steps matching the gentle flow of the water. For a long moment, neither spoke. She simply allowed herself to feel the warmth of his presence, the quiet assurance that he would always be there, unwavering, patient, and steady. Her heart, once guarded and trembling, now beat in harmony with his, each pulse a testament to the trust they had built together. Suddenly, the stillness was broken by the distant sound of shouting. A band of hunters, men who had long pursued her for reasons she did not fully understand, appeared at the forest's edge. They were armed, fierce and relentless. Fear flickered in her chest, but it was different now. It did not dominate her. She glanced at the Apache, who met her gaze with the same calm authority she had learned to rely upon. "Stay close," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever comes, we face it together." They moved through the forest with practiced ease, each step deliberate, every movement synchronized. The Apache guided her through hidden trails, over rough terrain, and past unseen dangers. She followed without hesitation, the fear replaced by the trust she had spent days cultivating. She realized, fully and profoundly, that trust was not merely a feeling, it was an action, a choice repeated in every step, every decision, every moment they faced together. As the hunters closed in, the Apache's skill and knowledge of the land became their shield. He neutralized threats not with cruelty or violence, but with precision and strategy, ensuring that they remained safe without unnecessary harm. She marveled at his strength, but even more at his patience, the quiet, unwavering presence that had taught her what it meant to be truly loved. When the danger finally passed and the hunters had retreated, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Relief flooded her, but so did gratitude, admiration, and love. She realized that she had faced the ultimate test, not of survival, but of her capacity to trust and love fully. And she had succeeded. That evening, they sat by the river, the sky ablaze with the colors of sunset. She turned to him, her eyes shining with emotion. "I never thought I could feel this. Complete. I never thought I could give my heart and know it would be safe. But with you, I trust, fully. I love, fully." He smiled, a quiet, gentle expression that spoke volumes. Love does not need perfection. It does not require lessons. It grows in the courage to trust, in the willingness to stand together. You have chosen that courage, and in doing so, you have made love real. She leaned into him, the warmth of his embrace wrapping around her like a shield. For the first time in her life, she understood that love was not fragile, nor fleeting, nor conditional. It was enduring, resilient, and unwavering when built on trust. Every trial, every fear, every moment of doubt had led to this. A bond that could withstand the storms of the world and the shadows of the past. As night fell and stars glittered above, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. And in that quiet, sacred moment, she whispered softly, "I am yours, completely, and I trust you." He held her close, his arms a promise, his presence a sanctuary. Together they sat in silence, knowing that the journey they had traveled, the fears overcome, the trust earned, the love nurtured, had brought them to a place of unshakable connection. In the wilderness, amid danger and uncertainty, they had found what she had once thought impossible: love, pure and steadfast, needing no lessons, only trust.